What an awesome trailer made by our media team to kick off this series. Our media team is just killing it. And in fact, so is the rest of our team here at Town and Field. I don't know if you know or personally know many of the staff members here at Town and Field Church, but they're working hard behind the scenes. You might not see it that much, and they're just killing it and pulling off some pretty cool things despite COVID right now. And I'd encourage you right now, grab your phone, take a second and text one of our team members and just tell them, man, love you, praying for you, and just encourage them. Let them know that you see that they're doing an awesome job and that you're thankful for that. I know that'd be really meaningful to them. Like Darren said, we're kicking off this series, Matthew, the Not Normal Kingdom. And this series is going to probably last 1.5 years or 2 years or something like that. We'll probably have some pauses here and there, but it's hard to know, like, where do you start with that? Like when we're doing like a 4 or 5 week series, it's like, whatever, here's a good way to start it. But how do you kick off that long of a series? And what I want to do in this first week, and I'm so glad you guys are here for this. What I want to do this first week is 3 things. I want to start kind of big picture and just lay a little bit of an overview for kind of singularly where we're hoping to head in this whole series. Matthew, the Not Normal Kingdom. If I were to lay something just for like a foundation just for the entire series, that. The next thing I want to do is just kind of lay a little bit of a framework for where we're going to be headed over the next 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks of this series. And then I want to get into the text. We're going to be starting in Matthew chapter 1, obviously, verses 1 through 6. This series, we're going to be walking through the book of Matthew. And if you're kind of new to the Bible's split into 2 parts. The first 2/3 is the Old Testament. And kind of after that, the final third is what we call the New Testament. It starts with these 4 accounts of Jesus, written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they're often called like the Gospels, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel of Luke. And what we're going to do through this series is when we come across words that are maybe just like churchy words or words that we don't use a lot, we're actually going to define them. And so I want to define the word gospel because I think it's important. If we're looking at Matthew, gospel means good news. If we're looking at the good news of Matthew, I want to understand what that good news is. So here's going to be our working definition, and we're going to pause and offer definitions as we work through this series over the next couple of years. Here's how I would define the gospel for you. The gospel is the good news that Jesus gave his life to restore a broken world, inviting us into relationship with him and to participate in his kingdom. I'll say it one more time. The gospel is the good news that Jesus gave his life to restore a broken world, inviting us into relationship with him and to participate in his kingdom. So I'm going to break that down just a little bit. So the gospel, which really means good news, is the good news that Jesus, who we're going to be reading about, Matthew's just this biographical account of a few years of Jesus' life here on earth. And so there's this good news that Jesus gave his life. Now, many of you know the story of Jesus. Some of you maybe don't. And if you don't, I'm really glad you're here to journey with us as we discover the story of Jesus together. But many of you know the story. You know that at the end of the story, Jesus gives his life. He lays down his life and he dies. Now, when we say Jesus gave his life, we're not talking about only his death. We're talking about his teachings, his living, everything that he's done from beginning to end, like all throughout human history. What Jesus is up to, he's giving his life, he's giving himself, he's giving him his teaching, his character, in order to restore a broken world. So he's bringing this restoration, this healing to what we call a broken world. Now, this world is broken because of something that we're going to come across. I think in verse 21 will be the first time we're going to come across this word sin. Sin, we'll define it this way. Sin is living your life differently than what God created you for. Living your life differently than what God created you for. So a lot of times we think sin is just like, oh, you did the bad thing. Well, it's not really that. It's acknowledging that God, who loves us, has given us a purpose and a meaning for our lives. And sin is just kind of us saying, no, I don't need that. I want to do my own thing. And because of sin, we believe that the world is broken and is struggling, and we see brokenness all around us. And the Bible would argue that that's the result of something we call sin, this waywardness, this choosing to stray away from what God's created us for. So the gospel is the good news that Jesus gave his life, all of himself, to restore a broken world. And when he does that, 2 really big things happen. First, he invites us into relationship with him. Oh man, the God who created the universe, the one who reigns above it all, the all-powerful, the perfect creator of the universe, invites us into personal relationship with him, to experience that with him. And secondarily, also, he invites us to participate in his kingdom. What we're going to see in the Gospel of Matthew is this idea of Jesus coming and establishing this kingdom, this new kind of kingdom. And what we're going to say, a kingdom that is not what people are expecting, a very not normal kingdom. We always have this idea of what we expect, the kind of the normal picture that we have of what a king might be. And Jesus is anything but that. And I would say that this idea of participating in the kingdom would be the main focus of what we're looking at through the Gospel of Matthew, the book of Matthew. As we look at the way Jesus lives his life, as we look at the way he teaches, as we look at the way he acts, when we observe his character, what we're realizing is he's building a kingdom, he's inviting us to participate in it. And I think this is what really easily and often gets missed in the modern church. A lot of us have grown up in a faith experience that's probably not that meaningful, where, it's kind of like, we pray a prayer one time, or we kind of accept something, and that's kind of it. We kind of just like plateau, and that's kind of where it's at. We're not focusing on spiritual health or growth or development. We're not asking ourselves regularly, am I participating in the kingdom of Jesus? It's kind of like when you're a kid, if your parents are like, hey, pack the bags, get in the car, we're all going to Disneyland. It's going to be awesome. And you're like, oh, I'm so excited. And you get in the car, you drive down to California, you get there, your parents pay the admission, you go through the gates, they give you the rubber stamp or the bracelet or whatever, and you get in there and you just stand there and you look around. And what if you just get in there and you look around and you don't do anything? You don't go on Space Mountain, what a travesty. You don't go eat the sweet, delicious $13 churro from the stand on the path that you're walking on the way to the rides. You don't go meet Mickey Mouse. What a waste of a day. That's kind of what it's like to have this type of faith where we say, well, Jesus is just kind of there to offer us something, but we're not going to engage and participate in his kingdom. The Gospel of Matthew is this, is that Jesus came. The good news is that he came. He restored a broken world, and he invites us into a meaningful, ongoing, growing relationship with him. And in that, he says, participate in my kingdom. Take part. Go on the rides. Eat the corn dogs. Go take a picture with Mickey Mouse. In the evening, let's go see the Disney princesses and Disney princesses floating down through the Disney parade. The fireworks go off. Engage in the exciting elements of this. Maybe that analogy is going a little too far. But there's this invitation to participate in his kingdom. And I'd say for a lot of us in the North American church, and probably going to focus on this a little bit later, is that we've stepped through the gates and we just stand there. We look around at all the cool things. We can read the book about this amazing kingdom that Jesus has established, but our level of participation is very low. We're just standing there, seeing what's happening and not choosing to participate. So that's what the series is ultimately going to be about. Jesus has brought this not normal kingdom, this new kind of kingdom. It's not what we would expect, but it's amazing, and he invites us to participate in it. And the series is going to be about asking ourselves, am I participating in the kingdom? Am I taking part in what the good news, what the gospel brings to me? So that's kind of the series overall, and we're going to spend years diving into what that means, and it's going to convict and challenge and shape us, and it's going to call us to an exciting mission, not some kind of lazy form of Christianity where we just sit around and observe, but where we engage in a really exciting and meaningful way. What I want to do with the next 3 weeks is just lay a foundation for the series, is to kind of lay the groundwork for where we're going to go, and then after that we'll have kind of more of a normal probably pace or way to work through it. When Matthew kicks off his gospel, he starts in chapter 1, verse 1, and he says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." If you've read the Bible for a while, you'll know that there are lots of different genres in the Bible. There's narrative, there's poetry, there's all kinds of stuff. But there's a genre that happens here and there, and it's genealogies. And for most of us, I'd say it's probably typically not our go-to. It's not like, oh, I just love in Numbers when they're just listing all these names I've never heard of. And maybe as you look at Matthew 1, you're like, oh, so that's what we're spending 3 weeks on, is a genealogy. But what this genealogy represents is a really cool origin story of Jesus. I love origin stories. My wife and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, been watching chronologically through the Marvel Universe movies. And I love it when they go back to the origin stories. You see Star-Lord as a kid. You see Tony Stark kind of starting out in the cave. Or even origin stories in our real world. I love, years ago, I think my wife and I watched a documentary about Walt Disney, and he had this rough beginning, and he's getting rejected, and tough things like that. I love those stories, hearing where the greatness came from. What we see in Matthew chapter 1, this genealogy, Matthew presents it in 3 chunks of 14 like generations. So there's 14, 14, 14. And what it really represents is a rich history, this incredible origin story. And I want to define a word here because I read a word that I think we need to define. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Messiah. Some of your Bibles might say Christ, and maybe some of you think that Christ is like just Jesus' last name, like Jesus Christ, or maybe it's like a tag on, kind of a nickname. Christ and Messiah really mean the same thing, and here's how we're going to define it here at Town of Field. Messiah or Christ means chosen one. That's it, simple, chosen one. So when you read the word Christ or Messiah anywhere in the Bible, you can think about this, chosen one. The Old Testament would maybe define it even better as like anointed one, someone who's been kind of like specially selected and talked about and foretold to fulfill a certain role. You see through this rich origin story that we're going to see in this genealogy that's represented through the Old Testament text. We're not going to talk about all of it. I mean, I'd love to spend a lot of time talking about the rich narrative story leading up to Jesus. It's so exciting, but we're going to zero in on just a couple points. But through this rich narrative, what you need to understand is that the people of the Old Testament have been living, kind of expecting this promised one, this chosen one who's coming. I mean, you need to think about like Neo from Matrix, or if you're a Star Wars fan, you got to think about like Anakin Skywalker, the prophecies foretold this one who's going to unlock this thing. But greater than all of those prophecies, greater than those chosen ones, Jesus is the one. So here's what Matthew's saying. He's like, here's the origin story of Jesus, this king, who is the one. He is the chosen one. And check out, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Well, why is that important? Well, the people, the audience that he's writing to here, they know that the chosen one is going to come out of the covenant, the promise that God had made with Abraham. And they also knew that God had made a promise to David that this great king would come out of as like one of his descendants. So Matthew's connecting the dots and he's saying, listen, Jesus descended from David. He descended from Abraham, and he fulfills all these prophecies, and everything, all the story, all our narrative up until this point, all of human history is culminating in this king, and he reigns above it all. And what happens is people start to get an idea, okay, there's this king. This is what he must be like. This is what he's going to do for me. This is how he'll act, because this is what I want out of this king. And what we're going to see throughout this series is that he is anything but what people expect. He's a weird king. He flips everything upside down. He has this totally alternative kingdom, this not normal kingdom. But it's better than the kingdoms we imagine. It's better than our earthly kingdoms, and he invites us to participate in it. So would you read with me as we look at the genealogy, the beginning of this origin story of Jesus, the chosen one who's been promised as a descendant of Abraham, of David. This is the king, the true king that Matthew's saying he's here. This is the one. This isn't a king. This is the king. So check this out. This first chunk of the genealogy actually goes from Abraham to David. And I'll just catch us up on the narrative really quickly. Abraham shows up. Hopefully you've been reading along on our Genesis reading plan as part of Town and Field Church. If you haven't, you can head over to our media page under the live streams. You can see the reading plan and hop in with us. We're actually in the middle of the story of Abraham. His name was Abram, which meant exalted father. Now his name becomes Abraham, exalted father of many nations. And he's this really pivotal character. What happened before him is that God had created this perfect world and invited people into a relationship with him. But people chose, like I mentioned earlier, they chose something different. They said, God, we know better than you. We realize you've created the whole universe and you sustain it all, but we know better than you. We've got figured out we're going to go our own way. This brought all kinds of problems, death and sickness and suffering and trauma and all these challenges. And as humans, we continue to choose that waywardness. We choose to turn away from God repeatedly. We go our own selfish way. We choose to lean into our brokenness. And after the beginning of the book of Genesis, you can continue to read how God is compassionately contending with his people as they continue to make bad choices and turn from him and reject him and rebel against him. And this story continues. But God is always in the business of bringing restoration to his people. And like our mission says here, to invite us to join in that restorative work in our world. And eventually this guy named Abram shows up, and Abram's nothing special. This is the guy whose name becomes Abraham. He's nothing special. He's just a person, but what God decides to do is do something remarkable through his life, which I believe God wants to do something remarkable through all our lives. This is something really crazy. He says, Abraham, through you, through your family, I'm going to bring, you're going to be like the vehicle for the start of something really cool. You're going to be the vehicle for the start of this incredible nation that's going to eventually give birth to this king who's going to change everything. He is going to be the person to bring life and restoration to this world. He is going to bring a kingdom that's going to change everything. So let's read this genealogy. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. So here you see this picture of Abraham, the one that this promise God was saying, I'm going to bring redemption and restoration through your family. And then it goes down to this king, this great King David, who God said, I'm going to bring, I'm going to bring a true king out of your line. Matthew's really leaning to this. He's saying, this is big news, guys. This is it. God has promised something, and now we're like watching it unfold before our eyes. After that promise was made to Abraham, and I'll just kind of hurry up and go through the story a little bit. That was Abraham, we read here, he gave birth to a guy named Isaac, and who gave birth to a guy named Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Essentially, Israel started a nation called Israel, named after him. He had 12 sons, and the 12 territories of the nation of Israel were named after his sons. It would kind of be like if hundreds of years ago, someone named Canada had 12 sons, and his 12 sons were like British Columbia and Alberta and unfortunately Saskatchewan, Manitoba. But if those were their names and they made this country, that's kind of what happened. But then what happens is this country, they're kind of in partnership with Egypt. They're beside them. They're doing okay. Over time, Egypt starts to feel threatened by them. And we start to read about this story in Exodus. And we're going to come back to that. They're enslaved in Egypt. And God brings them out of that. And he brings them to this place he calls the Promised Land. And this is supposed to be this place that God has guaranteed them, where they're going to experience life and they should be in relationship with him. But they continue to struggle, and they fail to trust God through this whole thing. And even in the Promised Land, they continue to have troubles. And the original idea is that God would be the ruler. They had a political system called a theocracy, which is where a divine being or a deity is actually like the monarch. But they looked around at the nations around them, and they're like, those are more normal. We want a more normal kind of kingdom. So they say, we want a monarch. So eventually, this guy named Saul becomes the king, and he had some good things about him, but he kind of went crazy toward the end of his life. And eventually, the throne gets taken by the second king of Israel, and his name is David, and he's this great king. He's got his own struggles, but he's a really great king. And I want to zero in on a part of the story, kind of in the middle of this genealogy somewhere. Like I said, what had happened was the Israelites, they'd been living kind of in partnership with Egypt and beside them, and things probably had seemingly been going okay. But also, when you get into the book of Exodus, you start to read the story of this new Pharaoh, which is like a king of Egypt, who all of a sudden starts to feel really threatened. He's like, there are a lot of Israelites here. What if all of a sudden they become too numerous and they kind of take over power here, and we're not in control anymore? So this insecure king decides, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. And so what he does is he gets his people together and he enlists slave drivers, and he says, let's go oppress the Israelites. Let's turn them into our slaves. Let's own them, and let's make them work and build up our power in our city, and let's rule over them. So they start to do that because he's hoping that this will kind of beat them down and suppress them a bit. But what actually happens in Exodus is that it says that in the midst of the oppression, in the midst of them being so severe on them, the Israelites actually started to multiply more. So I guess, you're going through a time of oppression and slavery, and things aren't very fun. Mom and dad find ways to have fun, and all of a sudden all these new babies come out, the nation starts growing, and it starts becoming bigger. So this Pharaoh goes nuts, and he's like, okay, we got to control this. So he actually gives orders to have a whole bunch of the baby boys, or all the baby boys of the Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jewish people, killed. He gets them to throw them into the river and brutally murder their children just to keep them down. Well, this still isn't quite working, and God looks at his people with compassion, and he says, this isn't what I created them for. So God calls this guy named Moses, who eventually leads this giant exodus out of Egypt. He liberates the people from their slavery, their bondage, their enslavement, their oppression, this tyranny in Egypt. He says, I don't want you guys to be in there. I want to take you to this place called the Promised Land. And you can read this crazy story of God doing all these miraculous works and stuff to get them out of there. But here's the part I want to zero in on. When the Israelites leave the nation of Egypt, they leave in Exodus chapter 12. In Exodus chapter 13, God says, let's lead them this way, because if they go along this certain road, they might come across trouble, and what they might want to do is turn around and flee back to Egypt. As a reader, you're thinking, what? This is the nation that was oppressing them and ruling over them and being brutal to them and beating them and working them into the ground. They might run back to Egypt? And you're like, no, that can't be. But what happens is the Israelites, they continue to wander through the wilderness, and they're lost, and they're going through these struggles, and they start to complain. And it's so fascinating because what you see is that they start to complain and say, we don't have enough food out here in the wilderness. We don't have enough this. We don't have enough that. And they start to say this, why can't we just go back to Egypt? Why couldn't we just stay in Egypt where we had enough food, where we had enough this, where it was like this? As a reader, you're thinking, are you guys crazy? God has promised you this place called the Promised Land. It's described as a land flowing with milk and honey, which is really any like lactose intolerant diabetics like worst nightmare. But it's this beautiful promised land that God says, I'm taking you guys here. I've brought you out of slavery. Not only have I liberated you from that, but I'm bringing you to something incredible. I'm bringing you to this new kind of kingdom that has so much freedom and life and excitement to it. But here are these Israelites, so untrusting of God and so uncommitted that they say, let's just go back to slavery. Now, why would they say that? And here's why I believe they said that, is because that's what they knew to be normal. They were used to that. They had become slaves and they were used to that lifestyle. And it was hard for them to be in kind of this time of disruption or this kind of like discordance, like out in the wilderness, and they weren't used to that and they were struggling to trust. And you might say, well, okay, Ryan, like, why are you talking about this? And here's where I want to land this. This series that we're going to be doing through Matthew is going to be a long series. And I don't know what things are going to be like a year and a half or 2 years from now with like COVID restrictions. The series isn't all about COVID or whatever, but I want to look for a second at this specific cultural moment because I think it exposes something about what we've become as the modern church. You see, what's become the refrain all through COVID, what I've heard from so many people is, I just can't wait to get back to normal. I just can't wait till we return to normal. You know, so many Christians saying, oh, if we could just get back to normal, if we just get back to normal. And I get it. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm an extreme extrovert and I want to be around people and I want to see people. But I feel like what we've decided as the North American church, the modern church, is that COVID has created a complete disruptance and disturbance of our faith. That COVID has like robbed us of our faith. And I would argue this, I don't think that COVID has disturbed us or disrupted our faith. I think that COVID has just exposed the cracks and the faults and the foundation of what has become the modern church. Now that might sound really harsh and really heavy, but I truly believe that we have come to a place where a pandemic shows up and we fall apart as a faith community because we've built something that isn't as strong or as great as we think. I think we're idealizing the past of the church. And don't get me wrong, I grew up in the church. I've had a lot of great experiences. I'm sure you have too. But for a lot of us, a lot of those great experiences, like, yeah, it's been fun, it's been comfortable, it's been this, it's been encouraging. And listen, that's not, as we're about to read the story of Jesus, about his kingdom, that's not really what Jesus came to create. Jesus came to create a kingdom where we participate and where we're faithful followers of him. And for years I've been thinking, God, like, is the North American church really embodying what it means to be part of your kingdom, to say your kingdom come and to be a part of seeking your kingdom and living in that kingdom and following after you as the king, the ruler, the master of our lives? And I would say no. The reality is that the North American church, whether we've been enjoying it personally or not, has been in decline for years. We are on the decline. More and more people in our cities, in our country, in our world don't know about Jesus. More and more people are unfamiliar with the good news of Jesus Christ. More and more people are unfamiliar with the story. And I'm just talking about people outside the church. Inside the church, less and less of us read the Bible. Less and less of us spend time in like spiritual disciplines. That is like activities where we're pursuing God, praying and reading the Bible. Less and less of us have a real faith or a sense of mission about what it means to follow after Jesus. Most of us, pre-COVID would just come to church on a Sunday morning. Our spirituality was just rested in this event of showing up on a Sunday morning. And it wasn't built in this lifestyle of participating in Jesus' kingdom all through the week. And it doesn't look anything like what Jesus came to establish. Jesus came to establish this exciting, moving, passionate kingdom where people participate in it with every ounce of their lives as a town, but also in the field. We're living it out all the time. I think gathering on a Sunday morning with a bunch of other followers of Jesus is really great. It's exciting. It can be encouraging and all that. But unfortunately, so many of us have become so entrenched in the idea that that's our spiritual activity for the week. And then the rest of the week, we just kind of go out and do our own things rather than being part of an active living kingdom. Jesus came to build a kingdom here on earth. And so many of us have become more fascinated with the buildings that we've built than the kingdom that Jesus built. beautiful church building that I'm standing in right now. It's great. But the reality is we have to come to a place where we could say this whole building could crumble. Everything could be taken from us, and we are still passionately pursuing the King. Not, hey, we're a bunch of people who are totally unfamiliar with the story. We're people who are less living out the mission of Jesus. We're less people who are not representing what Jesus' teachings taught through our lives. Most of it is just because we're unfamiliar with it. We don't know it. We don't know what it's about. So I'm excited to dig into the story of Jesus and say, what does it actually look like to live this out? Honestly, I think normal has become our Egypt in a lot of ways. Were there some good things about the church before? Sure, and I hope we'll continue those. But I think this is a pivotal moment. I actually think we've been given a huge gift. I mean, COVID's brought some real challenges, and I want to speak sensitively because I know it's impacted some of us more than others, and I do really care about that. I care about what you're going through. But I think in a way, COVID's been a gift, where it's a moment for us to stop and assess what faith is really about to us. Is faith about an event or a program or a building or a specific kind of gathering? Or is faith about us accepting that invitation into a relationship with Jesus and into participation in his kingdom? We've been overtaken by our laziness and our apathy and this idea that we can just kind of get the rubber stamp as we step into Disneyland type faith and just sit there on a bench and just say, all right, I'll just let Jesus do his thing around me. The invitation is so much bigger than that. When Jesus, throughout this text, he's going to call people to big things. He's going to say, deny yourself, take up your cross daily and follow me. Seek first the kingdom, lay things down. Throughout this series, I hope that there are serious changes that happen in your life. Like I hope if we're going to take Jesus at his word, we are going to have to make sacrifices. We're going to have to reorder our lives. We have to reorganize our priorities if we actually want to participate in his kingdom. If you just kind of want to walk through the gates, pay the entry charge and walk through the gates and look around, sure, you can return to normal. But this cry out for normal is the same as the Egyptians standing in the desert and looking over their shoulders and saying, I just wish we could go back to Egypt. Are you kidding me, guys? Yeah, you might have had food in Egypt, but do you remember when you watched them beat your mother and father into submission as they carried bricks down the path in order to build one of their structures? Maybe you had food and a bed to sleep in, but do you remember that time that they took your baby brother and drowned him in the river? You might say that's a harsh comparison, Ryan, like you're talking about like slavery under some tyrant and infanticide. Listen, I don't know if we actually look at what Scripture calls us to as a faith community. I don't know if it's like, if there's that much difference almost from an oppressive tyrant like Pharaoh drowning babies in the river than there is to us as modern day Christians drowning the next generation of followers of Jesus in a shallow, weakened, uncommitted version of faith. Our kids are drowning in our apathy and our lack of interest. We're too busy. There's too much on Netflix. We have too many extracurriculars. We have too many of these things that we need to do, too many of these goals. And Jesus shows up and he says, let some of that die and come and follow me. Give it up and find your true fulfillment and satisfaction in who I am, your King. I don't know where you're at as you're watching this morning. Maybe you're really new to this thing and to faith and you're like, whoa, this is intense. It is intense. I don't want to sugarcoat that. The call of Jesus is actually really big. I'm sorry if you've been at a church that's made it sound like following Jesus is easy and just like some quick prayer you pray and you're in. That's not it. Maybe you're kind of somewhere in between. You're navigating this. It's kind of new to you. And I want to encourage you. There is so much on offer here. The kingdom of Jesus is truly this promised land that has so much for us. Maybe you've been around the church for a while and you're following Jesus, and that's awesome. And I want to encourage you as we read through Matthew, what does it look like for you to take more steps, to lay more down, to surrender to this King and say, Jesus, King, I am all in on your kingdom. We look back to the normal of the historic church, and it just isn't, we're idealizing it. It's not as good as we thought it would be. I mean, in that trailer, there's some really cool looking events, and I'd enjoy that, and I'd love that. And I'm sure, I don't even know the specific history of Town and Field Church. I'm talking about the global church overall. We're on decline. We're not reaching people. We're not even reaching ourselves, and we're not living missionally. We're not surrendered to this true King of Jesus. We're not engaged with the story. We're not engaged with his teaching. And that needs to stop now. We are in a pivotal moment right now. We're standing in the middle of a wilderness. COVID has given us this moment where it's exposed the cracks and the faults in the foundation. We're standing in the middle of this wilderness, in the middle of this disturbance, and we have a big choice to make right now. And this choice, I believe, will ripple for generations to come. Are we going to look over our shoulders and are we going to say, I just want to go back to normal? I just want what we used to have. It was fine. It worked. In this plateaued kind of declining system. Are we going to look forward to the promised land and say, Jesus, please strip us of all the extra things we've added to this. Please strip us of the things that aren't about what your kingdom are about and make us true participants in your kingdom. That's what's exciting. And here's what I hope is the anthem as we go and we start to think about the Gospel of Matthew and participate in the kingdom. My charge to you would be this: part with normal, participate in the kingdom. Part with normal, participate in the kingdom. As we read through the Gospel of Matthew, you're going to see Jesus isn't someone who comes and says, okay, let's do the most normal thing we can. Let's find normal. Let's just adjust to the routine and the normal. Jesus is someone who comes and says, guys, listen, here's something incredible. The call is huge. The sacrifice is big. But as Jesus laid down his life for us, as he gave all of who he is to us, it was the same call for us to give all of who we are to him and to be all in as we follow his call and as we participate in his kingdom. If Jesus truly is king, that means that our response to him is yes, king. Not, all right, I'll chill here and watch you do your thing. And be really real for a second here. When I think about the church, I try not to just think of, our one little local expression here. I mean, it's beautiful and I'm really attached to you guys and I love it and I'm so happy to be here. But I'm thinking about what we're doing as a team globally. And what's been sad and I'll say frustrating to me through COVID is watching how many churches and faith leaders have just hit pause when COVID hits and we'll just wait this out. We'll just chill. If the church was already on decline and for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, however long this thing goes on, for a whole bunch of churches just hit pause, they've stopped paddling in the uphill, upcurrent battle of rowing up the stream. They hit pause. I mean, at the end of COVID, where we're going to be? We're going to be miles back on this thing. I am frustrated hearing faith leaders continue to just crave the normal and hit pause and just try to wait this thing out and ride this thing out. This is a moment for the church to show the world what we're made of, to say that our faith is stronger than some virus that can come in and try to shake this thing up, to say our foundation is Jesus. We're going to see him teach about having a strong foundation built on a solid rock foundation in Matthew 7. When the storms come, that we can't be shaken. And that comes from building our lives on his teaching and being all in on that. Not hearing his teaching and going and saying, okay, well, whatever, I got too much Netflix to watch, or whatever, I want to go do this, or whatever, I've got these career goals, or whatever, I want to be cool at school, I want to be pop, but being people look at us and they see the narrative and the kingship of Jesus shining through us as followers of him. This is not a time to hit pause. This is a moment for us in the middle of the wilderness to carve a path forward, to blaze forward and say, we are pursuing and participating in this kingdom. Part with normal, participate in the kingdom. Guys, I am so excited to be a part of this faith community. And if we would get this, if we would engage, if we would make this the main thing, looking at this king and participating in his kingdom, it's going to be revolutionary in our kingdom, in our world, in our country, in our community. This kingdom mentality is what we need to return to. I think we've lost sight of that for a while as the church, and this is time for reformation. This is time for us to return not to normal, but to who Jesus is. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you stick around for the discussion time. And I just want to say one last little encouraging thing before I wrap up here. This journey is exciting. We're in the middle of this wilderness thinking about this kingdom, and I'm so pumped. Jesus is going to teach us so many exciting things and invite us into so many cool spaces. And I'm so grateful for us to be doing that and gathering as a community. But this is one of the most exciting things we could be inviting people into right now. And inviting a friend to church is kind of easier now than it ever has been. It's just texting them a link. So the question I'm going to be asking you guys regularly throughout this series and probably for years to come is who you're bringing. Who are you bringing? Who are you thinking about that you could invite right now? Who are you praying about inviting right now? Pray about them and say, Jesus, I'm going to invite this person. Please soften their hearts, this idea of coming, and invite someone. Say, hey, we're on this cool journey, learning more about Jesus. It's really formative. And so, yeah, my question for you is who are you bringing? Hope you guys have a great week.